15 years across the education, technology, leadership, and entrepreneurship sectors, right? So his specialties are in program management, coaching, conflict resolution, community investment, stakeholder mapping, and training and capacity development. I mean, for me, I'll just like quickly chip in a word because I know Mr. Ahmed very, very, like, I know him very well, right? He's my boss at Teach for Nigeria. And then I'll say that, I mean, when I met him first in 2017, I know that, yes, I found an incredible man, right? So I don't want to say more than that. I know quite a lot of people who agree with me on that statement. Yes, so that's about Ahmed Alaga, the program director at Teach for Nigeria. Can we have the next slide for Canon? All right, so our second amazing speaker, his name is Nick Cannon, is the founder and CEO of Kizazi, a global organization which supports the development of breakthrough school models in developing countries. Wow, that's interesting. 8 years as a chief operating officer at Teach for All, amazing. Served as deputy director and head of the education team in the UK Prime Minister's strategy unit. He served in the UK Treasury as a senior education advisor. He was the economist for the Britain in Europe campaign. Nick is on the board of Literacy Pirates, and he lives in London with his wife Fiona and sons Isaac and Gabriel. So welcome, Nick. Welcome, Nick. I've looked forward to this day to actually hear from you and then hear you speak. So welcome, Nick. Thank you for being on the, yes, thank you for being. Right, so I mean, now we will have to like go right into it. Go right into it, right? Without wasting much of our time so that, I mean, we can get the best from our speakers. So I would like to like give you like time to, I mean, to speak. So I would like to quickly invite, I mean, in the order of how their bios were read, to quickly invite my boss, Ahmed Alaga, to have the floor, I mean, to speak to us on the topic. Welcome, Mr. Ahmed.
Good evening, everybody. It's a privilege to be here to speak with you all, and I'd like to see my organic. Yeah. Okay, so I think that education is something that I'm personally very passionate about, and, uh, and that's because I've spent an incredible amount of time in the education space and wondering how best to provide best of the kind of quality education that every child, irrespective of where they come from. And that's because my history or my background gave me an opportunity to understand, um, both sides. I, 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 I'm from, I came from a well-to-do family, so I went to the best of the best schools at the beginning. So my primary education was excellent. But then as I, you know, moved on the ladder, um, uh, uh, things changed for my family economically. And then I moved from somebody who went to some of the best private schools that had everything to a public school structure that had nothing. And it was difficult for me to understand uh, what was happening. So when it comes to talking about the topic, uh, especially underserved schools and low-income schools, I'm usually very passionate about it. Yeah. So if you think that if you hear me become a little bit emotional, it's not because it's just that I'm expressing how I really feel. So I think that especially with COVID-19, the experience for uh, uh, the experience kids who are either in public schools or low cost schools, the inequity gap has widened. I'm particularly worried. Someone has asked me and said, "Are you changing your program because of COVID-19. And my response normally is that no, I'm not just thinking about technology because of COVID-19. I'm not thinking about changing strategy because of COVID-19. I'm thinking how we're doing things because of COVID-19 has increased the gap for inequity. So because of that increase in gap from those who have and those who do not have, I am re-strategizing. And this is how I think most low-income schools or public schools should begin to think. Because we may fall within that, that firewall of trying to provide solutions to the current challenge and begin to think, like in most cases, that technology is the answer. I, for one, do not think that technology is the answer. Technology may be innovative, it may channel something fantastic, but I still think that we need to challenge ourselves more to think about some other processes, some other methods that are also cost effective and that can reach the amount of kids that we want to reach. For instance, I've seen fellows on our program find a way to present workbooks to their parents. And it's simple because even though they had done something to go on the radio station to present to the kids, they still do not have radio or any form of electronics in their homes. So for kids like that, how do you reach them? We have had people say, oh, we'll get funding and provide tablets and devices. But then again, you hit the workload of electricity and it goes on and it goes on. And then people begin to talk about reverse innovation, which is something I totally dislike. Anyway, so I think that for low-cost income schools, we need to start thinking differently about how to position ourselves, not just because of COVID-19, but because the gap of inequity is now broader. And if we come from a system thinking point of view, you'd realize that there's an ample opportunity for growth. There's an ample opportunity to achieve success. And I go back to that, they say that the word crisis in Japanese is written in two characters. The first character is threat, and the other character is opportunity, which is to say that wherever there is a crisis, there is an equal amount of opportunity. And so we have to be able to think deeply to tap into those opportunities that exist.
Hello.
Oh yeah, sorry. Hello.
Hello, I
How are
can
you
hear you,
doing?
sir. Yes, I can hear
Okay.
you. Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah.
So yeah.
Sorry, sir. Some people are complaining about the audio quality. So I don't know if it's the network or probably a function of a hardware device you're using or something. So they said it's skipping, and to me here it's not fully clear.
Okay. So well, if you want me to go back, I can go back a few. I could just highlight some of the things I said.
Okay, sir.
I think one of the things I said was that I'm very passionate about education, and because I've seen both sides of the coin, and then I think that I think the takeaway for me is that we should not get swayed with the crisis happening with COVID-19, and then think that the reason why we have to change is because of COVID-19. I was saying that I think that the reason behind whatever change that should occur for most low-income schools and public schools is that the gap of inequity is now wider more than ever. And when you have that mindset, it then informs how you are positioning yourself. Because if you position yourself because of COVID-19, COVID-19 isn't really the problem per se. I think the major issue is the aftermath effect, which is there's now a wider gap between kids who have and those who do not have. But I also said that if you think about the word crisis, such as COVID-19, the word crisis in Japanese is written in two characters. And the first character is threat. Second character is opportunity, which is to say that in every crisis that we're in, like COVID-19, is definitely an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for change. I mean, those were the highlights of the things that I've said. I don't know if the quality was better this time.
Yeah, I think it's better this time. I mean, no one was actually complaining again. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you very much. I mean, for me, I think I got something really strong, and in the fact that, I mean, the German translation or German way of writing the word crisis, which has to mean that, I mean, for every crisis, there are actually like loads of opportunities in which we should explore. Thank you so much for sharing, sir. Thank you so much. I know quite a number of people will be having burning questions right now to ask Mr. Ahmed, but I don't want us to go into questions now. I want us to hear from Nick first, and then we can now do the questions thereafter. So I would like to welcome Nick to actually share with us as well. Nick, you have the floor.
That's better. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Sorry, the perils of Zoom, and as we're all discovering, it was on mute. Great, really happy to be with you this evening. I mean, obviously a difficult topic to talk about, but I'm very grateful for the invitation and privileged to speak with you all. I hope you're all safe and well, personally, even in this difficult situation for lots of our countries. Like the previous speaker, I'd like to start by talking about another crisis that the world was grappling with long before COVID-19, which is, of course, the global learning crisis. So even before schools started shutting, 1 in 6 children around the world was not in school. 3 in 5 left primary school without reaching the most basic standards of literacy and numeracy, being able to read and add up, essentially. And that proportion rises to about 85% in sub-Saharan Africa. More than a third of children worldwide live in poverty, and most of those were attending schools which were really unable to address the impact of adversity on learning. Often, you know, obviously no fault of the schools, but it's a very challenging thing to do effectively. And furthermore, few schools were developing the broader knowledge, skills, and values that we all know are needed to thrive in today's world. And so on top of that crisis, along came COVID-19. And this has, of course, further exacerbated and laid bare the issues underlying the learning crisis. More than 1.5 billion children around the world are now out of school. Many of those are in families which don't have access to the internet. And even when they do have some technology, most public education systems are not set up to deliver remote learning. Learning for most of these billion children has effectively stopped. Furthermore, the wider consequences of COVID-19, including mass unemployment, lack of food and essential services, has also exposed children from vulnerable communities to increased stress, and in some cases, too many cases, increased violence and abuse. Our current school systems were not designed to address these sorts of needs. The technology infrastructure that's necessary for widespread online learning just doesn't exist, and teachers are not prepared and trained to support pupils in these broader range of challenges. So what do we do about this? Well, I'm going to share 3 big questions that I see education systems and schools around the world grappling with, and some of the answers that I'm seeing through my work. So first, what do children in low resource communities need right now? In my view, above all else, they need their physiological needs met. So things like food and shelter and medical aid, those essentials are critical before we can even expect or think about any learning. And this is not a given in many of the communities that we're thinking about. Children also do need access to learning opportunities, and those learning opportunities need to be largely self-directed, given few parents have time or capacity to replace the role of the teacher. They need to be engaging learning opportunities, and they should be as holistic as possible, covering different aspects of the education that children should ideally be getting. Children also need to be given the tools and the space to support their broader well-being and manage their own emotions. And finally, certain high-risk children need access to specialist support wherever possible, including really things like trained child therapists for the challenges that they're facing. Now, obviously, that's a tall order, but that's what I think children really need. So the fact is, many of these immediate needs won't be met, which leads to the second question of how schools can respond when they do reopen. Schools will need to ensure the safety of students, staff, and families until a vaccine or treatments are widely available around the world. And the WHO has issued guidance on issues ranging from the spacing of desks, hygiene standards that will be necessary in schools, and the need to minimize group sizes wherever possible. Schools will be required to build back attendance given falls in parental income, and this will particularly affect private schools. Children who've suffered additional hardship and trauma during the lockdowns will need support for their well-being for the issues that I've described. And schools will face significant learning losses to make up. And so we know that some disadvantaged children or disadvantaged children in general fall behind in the summer each year. And some estimates suggest that the COVID crisis will lead to children losing the average of a whole year's worth of learning. And that's even right now, it could be more. And so addressing this will require extra hours of tuition and remedial support. But given the socioeconomic and socio-emotional challenges I've repeatedly referenced, this will take time. So curriculums will need to be resequenced over months and years to make back up the learning losses that we're anticipating. And finally, schools will need to be prepared for further periods of closure during further waves of infection. And so building capabilities to introduce better forms of remote learning the next time shutdowns occur. So this leads us to the third, and for me, the biggest question, also referenced by Ahmed, of how we can use the crisis to fundamentally rethink the design of our schools to support children to thrive in the post-COVID world. So this for me needs to start from a holistic understanding of the purpose of schools. So as the crisis has laid bare, schools need to play a bigger role in developing in children a broader set of knowledge, skills, and values that they're going to need to thrive in the 21st century. And this broader vision for education needs to then be reflected in the curriculum and the assessments that we're giving to students. We're also going to need new approaches to pedagogy that goes beyond transmitting content from the teacher to the pupil to embracing more varied teaching and learning approaches, which we know work to develop higher order skills that we're talking about. And we're going to need to really reconsider all other aspects of school design, from creating school cultures that promote joy, rigor, and safety, to thinking about how to provide appropriate enrichment and remedial activities, how to use technology to support learning, how to better develop teachers, and how to better engage parents and communities in education. And these are all issues we needed to think about before the crisis, but the crisis is just laying bare the urgent needs to take on some of these challenges for me. And so the NGO I work for, Kizazi, exists to address this challenge. As was mentioned in the introduction, we work with local organizations around the world to develop and scale breakthrough school models. And so we're working with partners in India, in Armenia, in Ghana, and now in Nigeria, who are each developing new models for schools to try and rethink the model of schooling for their country and challenge the traditional paradigm. And right now, each of our partners are grappling with how to respond to the three big questions that I outlined that COVID is bringing to the forefront. And I'll just give you a few examples. So Simple Education Foundation in Delhi, India, has launched a no curfew for education program to support children and families during the lockdown. They're using low-tech platforms like WhatsApp to share home activities for parents and students, and to provide teaching modules for teachers, as well as well-being activities for parents and educators, and a lot more. So that's one initiative. The Akanksha Foundation, another partner of ours in Mumbai, India, has launched a task force to provide essential food supplies to vulnerable families of their 9,000 students. They're also training their teachers in how to support the emotional well-being of children when they return to school. Sarund Schools in Armenia has worked to redesign their school model, which they plan to open their first school in September, and they're now even more focusing on supporting socio-emotional well-being of students after they return from lockdown, and further integrating online learning into their model to prepare for future school closures, which I think we can anticipate. And then with ERIT here in Nigeria, we're now developing a school model which we're hoping to launch in Lagos and or Ogun State to prepare secondary students for life post-school. And I think that's going to be preparing for the world of work is an issue that's going to become even more important in the post-COVID economy with the challenges that we can anticipate. So I'll just close with a few potential lessons for low-cost schools, but really for all schools. So first, when I think in considering response to this crisis, I see a lot of organizations in education and elsewhere, understandably rushing to respond and reorganize and meet needs. And I understand where that's coming from, but I really encourage all of us to pause and really reflect on the purpose of what we're trying to achieve in education, and seek to really listen to children to understand their needs right now, and also what their needs are going to be coming out of this crisis and in the longer term. So pause and reflect and really think about the needs of children. Second, I think going through that reflection will lead all of us to consider both children's social emotional well-being and their academic learning. I think both are critical. We can't have one without the other. And so we need schools going forward that really take both sides of this seriously. Third, I think we should consider this crisis as an opportunity to innovate. And I do think low-cost schools have huge potential as they're flexible, autonomous actors really close to the parents and communities that they're working for. And they can really be in the forefront of responding by developing new solutions and approaches to respond to parents. So that's why I love the concept of this seminar and the focus on innovation. And I really think those solutions coming out of low-cost schools could benefit the whole of the education system as they emerge. And then finally, while I do think schools need to be rooted in the needs of their community, I think there will be benefit from being informed by the growing international evidence base about what works in education. So yes, focus on needs, all the things I'm saying, but also continue to try and learn. So many of us around the world are trying to tackle and address these similar challenges. And I think we can make progress faster if we work together and learn from each other. So thank you for taking the time to listen to me and making the time out of your day. I appreciate many of you, I'm sure, have been struggling personally and for your schools as a result of this crisis, and I know feeling for your families. But yes, I just hope we can take this opportunity to innovate and and get through this awful situation and come out of it by creating a better world for our children afterwards. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much. I mean, that was really, really insightful. Very, very insightful. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, I love the fact that you took us from what the school system looks like before COVID-19, the challenges that we were facing, and then how COVID-19 has come to exacerbate it, and then what will happen post-COVID, and how local schools can actually position themselves to solve some of the challenges that can come off post-COVID. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really, really insightful. Right, so now we will yeah, I can see people giving feedback in the chat board as well, right? Yeah, so that was really an insightful session. Yeah, so we will now go into the questions part. I mean, we'll be asking questions from our speakers here. I mean, we have some prepared questions, and then I'll be reading out those questions for our speakers. So, I mean, for everyone on the call right now, if you have any question, I would like you to place it in the chat box, and I will read it out here. I mean, Dami, please, can we have the questions on the screen so that I can read them out to our speakers, right? I think the questions are on the next slide.
Yeah, 1 minute, please.
Okay, thank you. So while Dami is doing that, I think one thing that stands, I mean, really common among the two session is the fact that this is a time for us to actually be really innovative and not take education as usual anymore, especially as low-cost educators. We need to start looking at how we can check into this crisis and explore the opportunities in coming up with innovative solutions that would not only better the children that we work with, but the entire education system in totality. Yeah, so I think that's really common. Now, let me read the question. So the first question here says, and this question I'll be asking from Mr. Hamed right now, that, okay, sir, I'd like you to just, I mean, tell us what are the alternatives you would suggest for low-income schools and students who do not have access to modern technology to ensure that they are not completely left out of the equation, especially considering that they and the other students will be hoping to compete in the same workspace in the coming years. I know Nick said something like that, but we know that these children will be competing with, I mean, those that are currently learning using digital devices right now. So what other alternatives will you suggest, sir?
Well, the truth is I may not have a list of what kind of technologies, but there are a few, and those that I've seen, like also Nick also said, as little as the usage of WhatsApp. I think that the most cost-effective solution is not the one that breaks your bank. I also believe that, which is something Nick also said, that there are many best practices within Nigeria, in fact, and outside Nigeria, where school owners have been able to adopt low technology to reach out to kids during this period. I've seen, teachers develop content on mobile devices. I've seen teachers also completely neglect technology and then find other means through which these kids can be reached. I mean, if you have a school in a remote community where access to technology is minimal. So the question is how creatively we're thinking about it. How much of the solution we're focusing on and not the problem. I mean, the more you constantly think about it in that light, the more you focus on the solution and not the problem, you tend to begin to identify, various ways through which the problem can be solved. I'm not saying it's going to be as easy as I've said, but this will take a lot of practice. This will take a lot of information. As school owners, you may need to learn new skills. And I even as, just learning how to engage parents on WhatsApp, as little as that. So you may need to acquire new skills, you need to acquire new knowledge, new information. The internet is a very wide space for where you can find out what's happening in other parts of the world,
Yeah.
where you can see how. So I guess the takeaway from me is uh, uh, thinking about it creatively and being very resourceful and finding out what other methodologies that exist out there, because they do, and just seeing best practices. And then again, focusing on the kids as well. I think
Yeah.
that I've seen a lot of solution during this period focus more on the school, right,
Yeah.
than the needs of the kids. So it's as simple as saying, what technology can we use, can our teachers use to reach the kids, instead of what technology can our kids use to engage with our teachers. I mean, so it's basically thinking around it and trying to see how what can work. There's no one size shoe that fits all in this scenario, but I've seen teachers who have adopted new technology. There's a particular teacher that I know who's handing out um, recorded magnetic tapes to kids. And each week she will collect the old magnetic tape and present a new one, and then put a new recording on the old magnetic tape,
Yeah.
and then distribute that back to the kids. I mean, so basically, it's just, I mean, she's probably using very old technology that I can't remember last I saw a magnetic tape, but she sort of realized that most people still have magnetic tapes. I mean, so it depends. So what I would say is just to think, creatively about it. Uh, um, Modern technology doesn't necessarily mean it has to be online. If you catch my drift, it doesn't mean it has to be a web portal or some app somewhere. Um, for me, my definition of technology is whatever makes your life easy and whatever does the job in the most simplest form.
Yeah.
Um, and if you'd like to put the word modern in front of it, then so be it. So it doesn't have to be a website, it doesn't have to be an app. But it could be an app, it could be a website. But I do know that the parents and kids from low-income family, like we work with a lot of public schools, and over 97% of the kids who are in our schools do not have digital devices at all. And in such a case, it's quite complex to say that you want the parent to go to a website and fill up stuff and get the kids engaged. So we've had situations, like I said, where fellows have to think outside the box and then begin to reflect the solution based on the context in which they find themselves. So the last thing I also like to say is that I think there's always good to do a needs analysis about your parents. And so if you could do a quick data gathering of, the kinds of parents you have, the kinds of devices they have, it will also better inform what strategy and what kind of technology you want to, adopt, but not a technology that you think as a school will make the work of your teachers efficient, but based on the feedback that you gather, what is available, what can be utilized, what can be adopted. I think that's the best way. I don't know if I've done justice to this question, but that's the best way I think I can.
Yes, yeah, I mean, right. So like what you said is really, really insightful in the sense that, I mean, if there are any alternatives that we should actually start considering, is the fact that there's no one size fits all. Not all technology should be modern, right? You mentioned magnetic tapes. So I think it's about, like what you said, I mean, how best can the students be able to like engage in learning, using the available resources. So what resources can the students use at a particular point in time, or that is available to the student? So I think in searching for alternatives, we should look more towards the student needs and and what they have presently, and how we can fit our solutions and alternatives within those resources that they currently have. Thank you so much. I think that you answered the questions very well, and even sharing the stories of people who have come up with other ideas that are actually different from, I mean, the new technology, like the magnetic tape. I mean, that's really, really, really such an interesting experience to share. Thank you so much for answering that question. So now to you, Nick. So a lot of people have been talking about the huge digital divide, the fact that the kids that we work with right now are the lower end of the spectrum. I mean, they are the lower end of, I mean, the huge digital divide. They don't have access to these resources, and not because maybe the resources are not available. Yeah, maybe in a way, probably when we talk about internet and all, but it's because of, I mean, major reason is the affordability. They are not able to afford these devices. They are not able to afford internet costs. I mean, I was speaking to a student in Rubochi in Abuja, and I was speaking to her, asking her how she has been learning during this period, and she said no, she has not been learning. That only her aunt has a smartphone in their house, and her aunt will never let her use that mobile phone. Will never let her touch the mobile phone because that's the only one in the house. So that's like a huge problem for us. So the question now to you is, how do we fund technologies for low-income learners?
Would you mind if I just say one thing about the previous question first, and then come back, and then?
Yes, you're free. You're free. You can say something.
Because I agree with everything Ahmed said. I think the only thing I'd add is, I mean, well, so I agree. There's a range of creative solutions, and we should all be looking for them. I've seen schools in rural areas looking at radio as a model that's also been quite seemingly quite effective and has been adopted by some governments. We're also working with in Sierra Leone and elsewhere. And I think, there are obviously things you can try and do, but I also think, someone wrote this in the chat, like it's very hard. Do I just need to wait for schools to reopen? And I think the reality is we do need to accept the limits of what we can do in this period of school closure. And I think that although that, will create further challenges, I think maybe sometimes our efforts would be better spent on really thinking about how we're going to make schools work when kids return, and if that might for some groups be the optimal solution. Like, it's very hard to reach all of these learners in remote and low technology environments, and many of them, the previous schools that they were attending may not have been delivering a huge amount, an optimal amount of learning. And so if we're able to fix that and really for when they return to school, set them up to learn effectively and well and be supported in all the ways I was talking about earlier, maybe that might be the better solution in the medium term, like really focusing for those groups on sorting the schools rather than sort of pushing water uphill on something where it's going to be really hard to reach all of these groups right now, and particularly when families have so many other needs facing them, economic hardship, and supporting learning for their kids, is ideal, but it's going to be so hard for many of these families.
Yeah.
Just another
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah. So if I could quickly just add Nick, before you move on, because I've had this conversation with people as well. There's a school of thought that believes that there's a higher return on investment if we actually go the route that Nick is saying. So rather than invest a lot of resources trying to build on technologies, why don't we invest that same funds in improving the existing structures that we have to do, specifically how kids will catch up and make up for the lost time. So if a lot of resources are spent on that, the return on investment may be higher than trying to spend a lot of funding on technology or any other process in closing the gap now, as to invest in improving the structures and systems when the kids come back. Yeah, I just wanted to drop that there.
Exactly. Yeah, no. I mean, ideally we do both, but I think sometimes we have to prioritize. And then on your question about, I mean, the funding for, obviously in an ideal world, these technologies would be more widespread, and that would set ourselves up better for all sorts of reasons, including future school shutdowns. And so, you know, I know there are various philanthropic efforts and efforts to engage private sector in trying to fund, in response to COVID, better availability of technologies and devices. And I think that's great. You know, where we can do it. You know, I don't think this is going to be a straightforward solution though. I think it's only ultimately probably going to come with, you know, further economic development and, you know, the widespread availability of technologies for all these low income households. And so, you know, and that's obviously being set back by the crisis as well. So I don't think there's I'm afraid I don't see a sort of silver bullet for you know, solving these technology gaps. Hopefully, you know, through time and growth, they will, you know, they will reduce, and some of these philanthropic and corporate efforts can definitely help. Still there?
Kaide? All right, then let me just, I think it might be having a bit of an issue with this computer. So let me just, let's move on the question from there. I'm going to read from the comment box for us to try and, okay. So I'm going to start with this particular one right here. My students do not have phones. They live in the villages, really poor contacts. How can I reach out to them in this situation? Do I wait till the reopening of schools? Teachers are not prepared for this at all. We need to readdress professional training and development for teachers in low resource context. In low cost context, the constraints are more than the affordances, electricity, Wi-Fi, phones, data, and it's really challenging. I think this person is, you know, talking about how unprepared this pandemic has made all of us. So I know that Mr. Ahmed had earlier talked about some fellows or some teachers who are using alternative means. He has mentioned, he has answered this in a way. So I don't know if, based on this person's concerns, if there are any other things you may want to add, either Nick or Mr. Ahmed.
Well, I know that a lot of things are tied to funding. I mean, um, it would also, I could easily have said you could send them worksheets, right? So you do a set of worksheets to just engage them during this period, but that will cost you resources as well. It will still cost you funding. Um, so it all depends on the resources that are available to you. And by resources, I mean that is it possible to speak to the community head in that location to see how they can donate uh, A4 papers or a photocopying machine from an organization, and then you can print out worksheets and share with the kids. Um, I mean, so it's all how you're thinking about it as well. Well, in my own personal opinion, which is where I'm almost tilting towards, is that in a situation where there's obviously, I have a teacher who goes to his school by boat, and during this lockdown, there's no means of transportation, so he has no way to access his kids. In this particular situation, either with this, right? So it depends on you as well, on how you can think creatively about it and the resources that are available to you. I know that for a fact that most classes up north, I have teachers who have 125, you know, kids in the classrooms. And if you were going to even print out worksheets of maybe say 10 pages, you're looking towards 1,250. I'm sorry, I hope I'm correct. Obviously, 1,250. Yeah, 1,250 pages. Uh, However, I do think that these are things that I do know that once you begin to start these things, people really get interested, especially if they see the level of engagement that is happening. So yes, for me, I think that there are some cases that may not be helpful, like in the case of this fellow who needs to go to school by boat, and the boats are no longer available, and there is no means of communication. Uh, and then you wouldn't say, I wouldn't say you should go to the community and then visit the kids, because you could also be exposing yourself or exposing the kids. You also have to observe the health measures that are put in place. So you really need to think about it critically and see what are the resources available that you utilize and adopt. I think that, and I think I said as well, not just for fundraising, because there's no one size shoes to fit all. You're more familiar with your environment, you're more familiar with the resources available, you're more familiar with the people as well that you can either take advantage of or align with. So it's a question of thinking deeply and seeing what is available for you to use. And I think one of the best skill of a teacher is improvisation. Um, your ability to improvise is a determinant. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I think Coyote is back.
Yes,
Okay.
network issue. I'm back, right? So, but I got lost at some point. I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah, so welcome back. I read a question from one of the comments in the chat box, so you can just take it from
Okay.
where you know.
Okay, yeah, great. Okay, so that's fine. All right, so I'll just like quickly move out on these questions that we have on the screen here, and then I'll just like, I mean, this time around, I'll be asking the last question from Nick. I mean, so I want to ask this last question here that says, what practical tools can low-income schools use to engage their students in this season? I know you talked about WhatsApp in some Indian schools. I mean, low as WhatsApp. So, I mean, for the low-income schools in Nigeria, what tools do you think we can use in this season based on the new normal in education? What are practical ways in which teachers need to step up in order to remain relevant teachers post-COVID? So I think this is like a two-in-one question, asking for the tools that we can start using during this period, and also the professional development needs for low-income teachers, especially, so that they can remain relevant post-COVID. So I'll throw that question to you, Nick.
To me, yes, I mean, I think like we've talked about some of the tools that schools can use, ranging from, you know, if there's availability of internet or phone use, then there's a certain set of tools that various schools have produced. I think one good thing in this crisis has been educators have come together, and there's been lots of sharing. Everyone's been putting their stuff out there on the internet, so there's almost too much available in terms of, you know, activities and things that you can use it, whether that's through online or WhatsApp or radio programs or printed resources. The challenge is getting those in the hands of families in remote and low technology communities, and also, just as I said earlier, the challenges that there's so many other priorities that those families are facing, you know, and you know, expecting them to prioritize ensuring their kids are learning is a big ask in this situation. And so, but yes, I think there are good tools out there. I can send around some links after this, but that I think schools can use, and that that have been developed by other educators, and depending on the mode of transmission that you're looking to adopt. I mean, on the second question, I mean, I think where you say, you know, how can teachers remain relevant post-COVID? I mean, teachers are going to be essential post-COVID more than anyone else. Like, I think this is the time when we need our schools to really step up, and you know, as has been discussed, there are going to be very significant issues kids are returning with, whether that's from additional adversity, hunger, you know, basic needs not being met, to the huge learning losses which we've been talking about. And so, yes, teachers playing a big role in meeting those holistic needs is going to be key. And so, as you're saying, that requires better support for teachers, professional development. And we know, you know, I think we know, you know, there's a lot we've learned about what forms of professional development are most effective, like for teaching practice. I think in school coaching is the most effective forms of professional development, and teachers need real support on their practice, and we just need the simple and effective approaches to that more widely adopted and implemented across schools and school systems. But also teachers need to be, and schools need to be supported in these broader aspects of education beyond the traditional academic, the ones I'm talking about, particularly in a situation where kids are coming in with additional needs. And so we need to train up teachers in how they support kids to manage emotions, to be resilient, to develop all of these other character traits and skills that are going to be even more important coming out of this crisis. And so, yeah, support for student well-being is a key role for schools, and yeah, so that's going to require big efforts on behalf of all of us to support schools to be able to deliver on that.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Nick. Thank you so much in tech competencies. I like the fact that you brought in, how teachers can actually be equipped as well to provide the needed support, psychosocial support for students after the pandemic. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, so I just want to quickly read out a story shared by Rodia, work that she's doing. She said, as earlier stated, the constraints are many. I manage a primary school that has an early childhood section. I have upon myself to do door-to-door outreach and give pupils printed educational
Hello, Kaide.
that they can work with for all kinds of app kids.
Hello, Kaide. I think your audio has a bit of an issue.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, I think your audio had a bit of an issue. It's the network, I think. But before you go on, please, Mr. Ahmed has to leave. He has to go on for something else. So we'll be wrapping up soon anyway. So just please read what you're reading again. Yes, the network was bad earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I don't know why the network is really terrible this evening. One of the cons of tech, anyway. So I said Rodia said something about what she's doing for her students during this period. So she said, stated, the constraints are many. I manage a primary school that has an early childhood section. Wow.
Yeah, the network was. All right, let me just read that for you. Let me just read that out for you. Okay. Rodia said, as earlier stated, the constraints are many. I manage a primary school that has an early childhood section. I have to take it upon myself to do door-to-door outreach and give pupils printed educational materials that they can work with for about a month. So Kaide is available? Okay, great. So Kaide had a bit of an issue, network challenge there. We've almost come to the end of the session anyway. Thanks everyone for joining. There's a part of, there's an expectation.
Yeah, I'm here. It's just funny how you can't hear me.
Yeah, it was skipping for a while there. Yeah. So I think just in wrapping up, I'm still going to hand over back to you. Looking at the expectations, out of all the expectations we had when people were filling the form, the last expectation, I deliberately put this up here, and this person is expecting tangible action plans. Person says, I'm tired of too many talks in this area, as I've attended meetings without serious provocation for genuine change. And I believe that from, thankfully, from some of our attendees and even the speakers today, what they've made us understand clearly is, government is unprepared, is as unprepared everybody else to manage this crisis. So if we really want to make any, actionable change, it has to start from every single one of us. At least, thankfully, some teachers in here, some participants here have shared a bit of their experience, and we'll be bringing a few more to share their experience as well. And going forward, I was hoping the next thing we want to talk about is looking at low-cost tech for low-cost schools. So I'm going to be sharing a poll with us very shortly. If we have any more questions for Nick, Mr. Ahmed had to leave. So just take the next 5 minutes to wrap up. So carry it over to you if there are any more participants that have questions. Carry, are you see there? Hello, Carry.
Okay, can you hear me now, Dami?
Yes.
So I'm trying to talk. I'm really talking here, but you just can't hear me. So bad.
Okay, go ahead. Hello.
I think we've lost him. This is the challenge of relying on technology.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Great. All right. So thank you so much for stepping in anyway. Yeah. So do we still have any more questions?
Okay. Thank you, Kayode. This is one of the cons of technology, like you rightly said earlier. We've come to the end of this session. But thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope you join us again. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on this call. Please, I'll give you like 2 or 3 minutes to just give your final remarks. Nick.
No, I've said the main points I wanted to say. Thank you so much for inviting me to join. It's great. It seems like an awesome group of people grappling with what I think is the most important issue facing the world, of how we can better educate our children. And it was the most important issue facing the world last year, and it's just become even more important in the current situation. And so thank you for all the work you all are doing and spending the time at this discussion.
For joining the call. Sincerely, we appreciate your time, finding out time to actually. Much more information about the next in the series will be shared with you, right? So thank you so much, everyone. We had a great time. Thank you again, Nick.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye.